Hello, today I'm going to take you through a short presentation looking at some emerging technologies. This is going to be a very basic presentation, but hopefully will give you some things to think about where you can perhaps explore a little bit more. As the topic suggests, emerging technologies is something which is always going to be changing. There's always going to be new technology emerging. So at the time this is recorded in 2020, these are some of the things which I think are most prevalent at the moment. So obviously since the outbreak of COVID and as it's affected the entire world, it's changed our way of working so much. So things like video conferencing facilities, digital platforms have become so much more important because we are relying on these tools to allow us to communicate, to do our work on a day-to-day basis. So many people are working from home, trying to communicate with each other and using things like Zoom or Microsoft Teams to have meetings, to keep in touch with each other. But Teams is also useful because it's not just about organising virtual meetings or teleconferencing. It can also be used to collaborate on documents, and it can be used for instant messaging so that people can keep in touch even without having meetings. It can be something that's fairly short and fairly easy to make contact with other people. So these are a big thing, and given the world we're working in at the moment, this is not something that's going to go away, and there's probably quite a lot of pressure on the companies offering these services to make sure that they're really up to date and they're fit for purpose, so they're not going to collapse all the time. They're not giving us major problems when we're trying to communicate. Prior to COVID, over the past few years, maybe the past 5 years or so, particularly with a lot of younger workers, there's been quite a move to a concept where younger employees don't necessarily always want to use the equipment that their employer provides. The company might want to give them a company phone, but they would prefer to use their own phone. And that's created some issues for the employers as well, round about data protection, security. If I'm accessing my information on my phone and it's my personal phone and I'm accessing confidential information with that, how's that all kept secure? So while companies may want to allow their employees to use their own devices, there are issues around about that. Also things like wearable devices. We can all get smartwatches, Fitbits, which can link to our mobile phones and everything else, but in theory employers can use those as well. They can use those to monitor the health and fitness, the well-being of their staff, and those will raise questions as well. It may be used to think about and support the health and well-being of workers, but there are also going to be issues around about surveillance, around about monitoring of employees, and is it something a company could force on their employees? Is it something that they can oblige them to do? Could they make it part of your contract that you have to wear a wearable device so that they can monitor you, they can see where you are, what you're doing? To some extent they can do that already, because if they give you a company phone, they can track your whereabouts with the phone, they can see what you're doing. But having something where you're actually wearing it physically all the time does raise some ethical questions, and there's possibly also ethical questions around about the issue of, if it's piece of work equipment and you're wearing it, can they continue to monitor it once you're not at work anymore? Can they, what should they be doing with the data when you're not at work if you continue to wear that device? So certainly things to think about, and because they're emerging technologies, because they're new in terms of how companies might want to use that information. There's going to be ethical issues, perhaps legal considerations around about these things as well, in terms of data protection, surveillance, monitoring. All of these big issues are going to become more relevant as well. Moving on from there, we look more at the idea of robotics. So robots have been in factories for a long time now. They're part of the normal setup in factories, but they are beginning to be seen a bit more. And I think, again, in the environment we're living currently with COVID, I remember seeing something on the television recently where a care home actually had a robot going around chatting to the residents in the care home, giving them some social interaction, talking to them. The idea of having a robot in the home is something that we've seen in sci-fi movies, but if they're actually starting to put these robots into place in those sorts of environments, it's something that's developing and expanding, and we could see how that could increase where social distancing is becoming an issue. Artificial intelligence and machine learning. Artificial intelligence is something that's growing a lot, and a concept that is quite a hot topic as well is the idea of big data, where we can get masses of data, masses of information, and we're looking to see how we can analyse it, how we can interpret it. If you think about how education systems have had to deal with exam results this year, where exams haven't been able to be taken and they've had to use algorithms to try and calculate acceptable grades for the students who would otherwise have been sitting the exams. In a lot of cases, those algorithms have got it wrong, but that's an example of artificial intelligence. The problem with artificial intelligence is that it's only as good as its programming. Yes, artificial intelligence is designed to be able to perform tasks that normally would be associated with people normally. The idea of machine learning takes that one step further. So with artificial intelligence, it can't think beyond its programming. But the idea of machine learning is that the computer will reflect on what it's done, and it will devise plans to adapt its behaviour or adapt its way of doing things so that it actually learns, and it will improve, and it will avoid making that mistake in the future. It's what we're seeing applied with driverless cars. Yes, we can program a car that will drive, it will learn, it can be programmed in terms of the standard rules of engagement when you're driving a car. It cannot be programmed to deal with the unexpected, the unpredictable driver, those sorts of situations. Machine learning allows for the car's programming. It's artificial intelligence, for want of a better word. It will allow that car to learn from experiences. If someone pulls out in front of it and it's not part of its learning, it will reflect, it will adapt how it deals with that so that it can process it differently in the future. It's still a very long process, and it takes a long time for a computer to learn, but the idea is that it will be adaptable, it will be more responsive, and it will learn from previous experiences the way we do. It's exactly how we learn. We reflect on what's worked, what hasn't worked, and we will think about, you've written a report and you get it back and you've got feedback. My hope as a lecturer is that you'll look at that feedback and think, right, okay, I made this mistake this time. When I do my next report, I know not to do that. I know to do something slightly different, to make changes. So with machine learning, the machines are doing the same. They're learning so they won't make the same mistake again. As I say, this is something that's very new. It's a very new concept, but it is something that is there. It is something that is emerging and developing. Augmented reality and virtual reality. Most people have heard of VR headsets and things like that. In the terms of, in the business environment, these pieces of equipment are being used to help train people, doctors, pilots, putting them in a training environment, a simulated environment where they can practice, where they can learn how to fly without crashing a plane, for example. So they will get certain amount of experience prior to actually getting in a plane or operating on someone. So the idea is that they have a good sense of the reality, but they're using technology to help develop their skills before they're taken into the practical experiences that you would hope that ultimately they will get before they're fully qualified and fully trained. So, looking at all of that, from an HR point of view, how does this all impact? So it impacts on every part of HR. It really impacts on everything that HR does, in terms of even just down to the basics of, you have so much more data, you can target how you're recruiting, you can make sure that the training that you're providing is more developed, is more targeted to meet the needs of the company and your employees. But we can also use the technology to really target how we recruit people, where we advertise, how we select, using algorithms, using artificial intelligence to actually sift through lots of online applications to decide who goes for interview and who doesn't. Technology can be used for training. This video is an example of that. But we've also got lots of online learning, lots of interactive learning. We use apps, we use bite-sized learning. There's all sorts of different ways that training and development can be delivered using technology. Can use technology to think about how we're going to motivate employees. It will allow us to get a better understanding. We can get much more data, much more information about what people want, and therefore we can target and tailor the rewards that are offered to employees to meet their needs much more closely. Looking back at Teams and some of the other communication methods, it allows us to communicate perhaps more easily with our employees. It allows us to engage with them more directly. It gives us much more flexibility in terms of, just taking for example, if you're working from home, you can have more flexibility over how you work, when you work. It's giving you more control, and it's much more flexible for the employer as well. It allows you to manage performance much more closely because of the analytics. You can analyse and identify trends in employee behaviours, whether it's a particular employee or, looking at a department or looking at entire workforce and saying, staff are off on a particular day. I was actually reading something earlier on today where a colleague had commented that he could see, just looking at statistics and analytics for a few courses, that students are off, particularly with online training. Students are not logging on to their classes when new games are released. So, maybe missing one or two people out of the classroom, you might not notice it, but when you're looking at the entire student population, you're perhaps going to notice an increase in absence on a particular day, and you then can look and see, what was happening at that time that caused that. So technology can be quite good at, from an HR point of view. It allows us to interact better with our employees. It allows us to be more targeted in how we recruit, how we train them, what we offer them in terms of the rewards that maybe are going to engage them. But it also allows us to analyse data much more, to be much smarter in terms of identifying trends, where there's problems, where there's absence issues, where there's perhaps turnover issues, where a lot of staff are leaving. So it's got quite a broad range of different ways in which it can impact on HR. And I would just like to finish off by saying thank you for listening.